Nathan Langford, a successful chief financial officer for a prominent tech firm in Austin, Texas, and his wife, Vanessa Langford, a talented fashion designer, were the picture of marital bliss to their friends and neighbors. Their home, with its manicured lawn and modern architectural design, stood as a testament to their seemingly perfect life. However, beneath the surface, a dark current was stirring. Nathan's growing fascination with a taboo fantasy would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter their idyllic existence and end in tragedy. What began as a consensual exploration of desires would spiral into a maelstrom of jealousy, betrayal, and ultimately, murder. Nathan Langford was born in 1983 to a middle-class family in San Antonio. From an early age, he displayed a keen intellect and a fascination with finance and numbers. His parents, both educators, nurtured his interests, and by the time he entered high school, Nathan was already mastering complex financial concepts. Despite his academic prowess, he struggled socially, often feeling awkward and out of place among his peers. Vanessa Langford, born in 1985, grew up in a wealthy family in Houston, Texas. The youngest of 3 children, she was vivacious and creative from the start. Her parents, successful real estate developers, provided her with every opportunity, including art classes and fashion design courses. Their paths crossed in 2003 at the University of Texas at Austin, where Nathan, a junior majoring in finance, literally bumped into Vanessa, a freshman studying fashion design, in the campus library. He was immediately smitten by her radiant smile and effortless charm. Vanessa, in turn, found herself drawn to Nathan's quiet intensity and brilliant mind. Their courtship was a whirlwind of intellectual discussions, late-night study sessions where Vanessa would sketch designs while Nathan analyzed financial models, and explorations of Austin's eclectic music scene. Despite their different backgrounds and personalities, they found in each other perfect complement. They married in 2007, shortly after Vanessa's graduation. The wedding, held in a picturesque vineyard in the Texas Hill Country, was a joyous affair, seemed to portend a bright future. Nathan had already secured a high-paying job at a tech firm in Austin, while Vanessa began to make a name for herself in the city's competitive fashion scene. For the first few years of their marriage, life seemed perfect. They bought their dream home in a trendy Austin neighborhood, traveled the world, and built a wide circle of friends. Nathan's career soared as he climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming the CFO of a major tech company. Vanessa's fashion business flourished. Her designs featured in several magazines. From the outside, the Langfords appeared to have it all: successful careers, a beautiful home, and a strong, loving marriage. But as they entered their 30s, subtle cracks began to form in their seemingly flawless facade, setting the stage for the tumultuous events to come. As the Langfords approached their 10th wedding anniversary, a restlessness began to creep into their relationship. Passion that had once burned so brightly had dimmed to a comfortable but sometimes monotonous glow. Nathan, always introspective, found himself increasingly drawn to online forums and discussions about alternative lifestyles. It started innocently enough, curiosity about what other couples did to spice up their love life. But as Nathan delved deeper into these virtual communities, he became particularly fascinated by the concept of cuckold. The idea of watching his wife with another man, being a voyeur to her pleasure, awakened something within him. First, Nathan kept these thoughts to himself, ashamed and confused by the intensity of his desire. He would stay up late, ostensibly working, but in reality, he was consuming every piece of cuckold-related content he could find. Vanessa, perceptive as ever, sensed the change in her husband. She noticed his distraction, the way his eyes would sometimes glaze over during their conversation, and the increased frequency of his late nights at the computer. Concerned, she gently probed, asking if everything was all right. Work was becoming too stressful. Finally, after weeks of internal struggle, Nathan decided to broach the subject with Vanessa one evening. Over a bottle of wine, he haltingly confessed his newfound interest, speaking of his desires and his curiosity about exploring this fantasy, all the while watching Vanessa's face for signs of disgust or rejection. To his surprise and relief, Vanessa didn't recoil. Instead, she listened with an open mind, asking thoughtful questions about what exactly appealed to him about this scenario. While she expressed initial reservations, she also admitted to a certain intrigue. The idea of being desired by another man, being the center of attention, held its own allure. This conversation marked a turning point in their marriage. What had been a private fantasy for Nathan was now out in the open, a possibility to be explored together. Neither of them could have predicted the profound impact this revelation would have on their lives, or the dangerous path it would ultimately lead them down. The Langfords' foray into the world of cuckolding began cautiously. They set ground rules, discussed boundaries, and agreed to take things slowly. But finding the right person to introduce into their marriage proved challenging. They wanted someone attractive and charismatic, but also discreet and respectful of their arrangement. Enter Dominic Wren. Vanessa met him at a charity gala in downtown Austin. Tall, with piercing green eyes, Dominic exuded a magnetic charm that drew people to him. As the owner of a successful luxury car dealership, he moved effortlessly through Austin's elite circles, his wit and knowledge making him the center of attention at any gathering. Vanessa was immediately drawn to Dominic's sophisticated aura. They spent the evening in animated conversation about the latest trends in fashion and the luxury car market. When Dominic casually mentioned being unattached and open to new experiences, Vanessa felt a spark of excitement. She relayed her encounter to Nathan that night, watching his eyes light up as she described Dominic. They agreed that he might be the perfect candidate for their exploration. Nathan encouraged Vanessa to nurture the connection, his excitement palpable. Over the next few weeks, Vanessa and Dominic met for coffee several times, ostensibly to discuss potential collaborations between his dealership and her fashion brand. Each time, Vanessa returned home to regale Nathan with stories of their encounters, stoking the flames of his fantasy. Finally, after a particularly flirtatious meeting, Vanessa decided it was time to broach the subject with Dominic. To her surprise and delight, he was intrigued by the proposition. He admitted to having participated in similar arrangements before and understood the delicacy required. With Dominic on board, the stage was set for the Langfords to turn fantasy into reality. Little did they know that this decision would set in motion a series of events that would irrevocably change their lives. The night of the first encounter arrived with a mix of nervous energy and excited anticipation. Nathan and Vanessa had spent weeks planning every detail, from the ambient lighting in their bedroom to the bottle of expensive champagne chilling in an ice bucket. Dominic arrived at 8 p.m. sharp, looking dashing in a tailored charcoal suit. He brought with him a bouquet of exotic flowers for Vanessa and a rare bottle of scotch for Nathan, a gesture that impressed them both with its thoughtfulness. The evening began in the living room with drinks and light conversation. Dominic regaled them with stories from the luxury car world, his charisma on full display. Vanessa, dressed in a slinky black dress, laughed at his jokes and touched his arm with increasing frequency. Nathan watched from his armchair, a tumbler of scotch in hand, his heart racing with every interaction between his wife and their guest. As the night progressed and the alcohol flowed, the atmosphere grew charged with sexual tension. Finally, with a meaningful look at Nathan, Vanessa took Dominic by the hand and led him upstairs to the bedroom. Nathan settled into a corner armchair as Vanessa and Dominic began to kiss passionately. When Dominic and Vanessa finally fell onto the bed, their bodies entwined, Nathan felt a potent mix of arousal and an unexpected twinge of jealousy. The encounter itself was intense and passionate. Nathan watched, transfixed as his fantasy played out before his eyes. The reality was more visceral, more overwhelming than he had imagined. Afterward, as they all lay spent and silent, Nathan felt a complex swirl of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly. His long-held fantasy had been realized, but there was also a nagging sense of unease, feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Dominic left shortly after, with promises to stay in touch. As Nathan and Vanessa lay in bed, discussing the evening's events in hushed, excited tones, neither could have predicted how this first encounter would set the stage for the tragedy to come. They had opened Pandora's box, and there would be no closing it again. Encouraged by the success of their first foray into cuckolding, they eagerly arranged more meetings with Dominic. What had started as a monthly indulgence quickly became a weekly affair. Each encounter seemed to push the boundaries further, with Dominic staying longer and the sessions growing more intense and intimate. Nathan's role began to evolve as well. Initially content to watch from afar, he found himself drawn closer to the action, sometimes even joining in. The dynamics of power and control within their bedroom became increasingly complex. Outside of their encounters, Dominic began to integrate more into their lives. He would join them for dinner, accompany Vanessa to fashion shows, even spend weekends at their home. His charm and wit made him a delightful companion, and the Langfords found themselves enjoying his company, even when intimacy wasn't on the agenda. As spring turned to summer, Nathan's initial excitement began to give way to a gnawing sense of discomfort. He started to notice small but significant changes in Vanessa's behavior. She seemed distracted during their alone time, her mind elsewhere. She began to dress up more often, even on days when they had no plans with Dominic. One evening, Nathan came home early from work to find Vanessa on the phone, speaking in hushed, intimate tones. When she saw him, she quickly ended the call, claiming it was just a client. But Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that she had been talking to Dominic. In bed, Vanessa's passion seemed to have cooled. She was still enthusiastic during their encounters with Dominic, but alone with Nathan, she often seemed tired or disinterested. Nathan found himself initiating intimacy more often, only to be gently rebuffed. Nathan tried to reassert control over the situation. He suggested taking a break from their arrangement, perhaps going on a vacation just the two of them, but Vanessa seemed reluctant, always finding reasons to delay or change the subject. His work began to suffer, as he spent hours analyzing every interaction, every text message, every glance between Vanessa and Dominic. He started checking Vanessa's phone when she wasn't looking, scrutinizing her social media activity, even contemplating following her when she went out alone. Nathan knew he was spiraling. He felt powerless to stop it. The game he had initiated was slipping out of his control, and he was terrified of losing Vanessa. As his anxiety grew, so did his determination to put an end to the situation he had created, by any means necessary. The breaking point came on a warm July evening. Nathan had planned a romantic dinner at home, hoping to reconnect with Vanessa and discuss his growing concerns. He had left work early, bought her favorite wine, spent hours preparing an elaborate meal. But as the sun began to set and the candles burned low, Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Hours ticked by, the carefully prepared food growing cold on the table. When she finally stumbled in shortly before midnight, her hair disheveled and lipstick smudged, Nathan's worst fears seemed confirmed. The argument that ensued was explosive. Nathan, his emotions amplified by alcohol and hours of anxious waiting, unleashed all the fears and suspicions he'd been harboring. He accused Vanessa of falling in love with Dominic, of making a fool of him, destroying their marriage. Vanessa, caught off guard and defensive, initially tried to deflect. She claimed she'd lost track of time at a client meeting, that her phone had died. But faced with Nathan's relentless questioning and the evidence of her appearance, she finally broke down and admitted she had been with Dominic. The confession hit Nathan like a physical blow. He had suspected, feared, but hearing it confirmed shattered something inside. In that moment, all the excitement and thrill of their arrangement evaporated, leaving only a deep sense of betrayal and anger. Vanessa, tears streaming down her face, tried to explain. She insisted she loved Nathan, but Dominic made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. She was confused, torn between her loyalty to her husband and her deepening emotions for Dominic. Nathan, his voice low and dangerous, demanded that she end things with Dominic immediately. Vanessa, her own anger rising, refused. This had been Nathan's idea in the first place, she argued. Couldn't dictate her feelings or control her relationships. The argument escalated, with both of them saying hurtful things they would later regret. In a moment of rage, Nathan smashed a wine glass against the wall. Vanessa, shocked by this uncharacteristic display of violence, retreated to the guest bedroom, locking the door behind her. Nathan spent the night on the couch, his mind racing, unable to sleep. In the days following their confrontation, a chilling calm settled over the Langford household. Vanessa and Nathan moved around each other like ghosts, barely speaking, tension palpable. Vanessa spent most of her time out of the house, throwing herself into her work, and Nathan suspected, meeting with Dominic. Nathan, for his part, retreated into a dark place within himself, called in sick to work, spending his days in a haze of alcohol and paranoid thoughts. He scoured Vanessa's computer and phone for evidence of her relationship with Dominic, meticulously documenting every text, every call, every unexplained absence. Nathan began to fantasize about confronting Dominic, about making him pay for destroying his marriage. First, these were just harmless daydreams, a way to vent his frustration. But as the days wore on and Vanessa grew more distant, these fantasies took on a darker, more violent tone. One afternoon, while Vanessa was at a client meeting, Nathan found himself in their garage, holding the heavy wrench he used for home repairs. As he felt its weight in his hand, chilling thought crossed his mind. It would be so easy to end this, to eliminate the threat to his marriage once and for all. Horrified by the direction of his thoughts, Nathan dropped the wrench and fled the garage. The seed had been planted. As he paced the house, gulping down glasses of whiskey, the idea took root and grew. By the time night fell, what had started as a fleeting, horrifying thought crystallized into a plan. August 15th dawned hot and humid, with the air heavy with the promise of an approaching storm. Nathan woke early, his head pounding from another night of heavy drinking. but his resolve unwavering. Today would be the day he confronted Dominic, the day he reclaimed control over his life and his marriage. He spent the morning in a feverish state of preparation. He showered, shaved, and dressed with meticulous care, as if preparing for an important business meeting, rather than the violent confrontation he was planning. In the garage, he selected the wrench he had held days earlier, wrapping it in a towel and placing it in a nondescript gym bag. Vanessa left for work around 9 a.m., barely acknowledging Nathan as she rushed out the door. As soon as she was gone, Nathan got into his car and drove to Dominic's dealership. Parked across the street, watching as Dominic arrived, greeting his employees with his characteristic charm. For hours, Nathan sat in his car, the sun beating down on him, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he watched Dominic go about his day. As closing time approached, Nathan watched Dominic bid goodbye to his last customer and begin closing up the dealership. This was the moment he had been waiting for. With shaking hands, Nathan grabbed the gym bag and crossed the street. Dominic was locking the dealership door when Nathan approached. He turned, surprise flickering across his face, for it settled into a wary smile. "Nathan," Dominic said, "this is unexpected. Is everything all right?" Nathan felt a surge of rage at Dominic's casual tone, as if he hadn't been destroying Nathan's life for months. Without conscious thought, he swung the gym bag, catching Dominic off guard and sending him stumbling back against the dealership door. What followed was a blur of violence and desperation. Nathan pulled out the wrench, swinging it wildly as Dominic tried to defend himself. Nathan was beyond reason. Every blow was fueled by months of jealousy, insecurity, and rage. When it was over, Nathan stood panting over Dominic's motionless body, the wrench slick with blood in his trembling hand. The reality of what he had done crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had just killed a man. He had just destroyed his own life in a futile attempt to save it. Nathan went through the motions of covering his tracks. He dragged Dominic's body into the alley behind the dealership, hiding it behind a dumpster. He wiped down the door handle and any surfaces he might have touched. Then, still in a state of shock, he drove home, the weight of his actions settling over him like a shroud. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke as Nathan pulled into his driveway, the rain washing away the blood on his hands, but doing nothing to cleanse his conscience. The hours following the murder passed in a nightmarish blur for Nathan. He stumbled into the house, barely making it to the bathroom before violently emptying the contents of his stomach. As the adrenaline wore off, the full impact of his actions hit him. He had killed a man. He was a murderer. Operating on autopilot, Nathan set about destroying evidence. He burned his clothes in the backyard fire pit, scrubbed the car clean, and took a shower. When Vanessa came home, Nathan had composed himself enough to feign normalcy. He greeted her with forced cheerfulness, suggesting they order takeout and watch a movie. As they sat on the couch, the TV flickering unwatched, Nathan's mind raced. He knew it was only a matter of time before Dominic's body was discovered. He needed an alibi, a story to tell when the inevitable questions came. He casually mentioned to Vanessa that he had spent the day at home, catching up on work and doing some yard work. He even showed her a small cut on his hand, claiming he had nicked himself while pruning the rose bushes, cut that had actually come from his struggle with Dominic. 2 days after the murder, the news broke. Dominic Wren, prominent luxury car dealer and fixture of Austin's elite circles, had been found dead behind his dealership. The police were treating it as a homicide. Nathan learned of the discovery while at work, overhearing colleagues discussing the shocking news. He felt the blood drain from his face, his hands shaking so badly he had to excuse himself to the restroom. The investigation moved quickly. Detective Carla Mendoza, a veteran of the Austin Police Department's Homicide Division, took charge of the case. She and her team combed through Dominic's life, interviewing friends, family, and business associates. It didn't take long for them to uncover Dominic's relationship with the Langfords. Vanessa, devastated by the news of Dominic's death, initially tried to downplay their connection. Faced with evidence from Dominic's phone records and witness accounts, she eventually admitted to their affair. When the police came to interview Nathan, he was prepared. He expressed shock and sadness at Dominic's death, acknowledging that while their arrangement had been unconventional, he had considered Dominic a friend. He calmly recounted his movements on the day of the murder, his story aligning perfectly with what he had told Vanessa. Detective Mendoza, however, sensed something off about Nathan's demeanor. His calm seemed forced, his grief a touch too performative. She made a mental note to dig deeper into his background and movements. As the investigation progressed, the the police began to piece together a timeline of Dominic's last day. Security footage from nearby businesses showed him entering the dealership in the morning, but never leaving. His last phone call had been to Vanessa, ending abruptly around closing time. The net was slowly closing around Nathan. As the days turned into weeks, Vanessa's grief over Dominic's death deepened. She threw herself into her work, often staying late at the office, avoiding the stilted silences that now characterized her home life with Nathan. At first, Nathan's attentiveness in the wake of the tragedy had touched her. He seemed genuinely concerned for her well-being, always ready with a comforting word or a shoulder to cry on. But as time passed, she began to notice inconsistencies in his behavior. Vanessa found herself revisiting the events leading up to Dominic's death. She remembered Nathan's jealousy, his desperate pleas for her to end the affair. The more she thought about it, the more a terrible suspicion began to take root in her mind. She started paying closer attention to Nathan's actions, noting when he left the house, checking his browser history when he wasn't around. She even considered hiring a private investigator, couldn't bring herself to take that final step. As her suspicions grew, so did her fear. If Nathan was capable of what she was beginning to suspect, what else might he be capable? For the first time in their marriage, Vanessa found herself afraid of her husband, unsure of the man she had promised to love for better or worse. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. A homeless man known to frequent the alley behind Dominic's dealership came forward with information. He claimed to have seen a man matching Nathan's description entering the alley on the night of the murder, carrying a gym bag. This new lead energized the investigation. Detective Mendoza and her team began to scrutinize Nathan's movements more closely. They discovered traffic camera footage that contradicted his alibi, showing his car near the dealership around the time of the murder. As the evidence mounted, Nathan's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started drinking heavily, snapping at colleagues, and becoming paranoid about being followed. Vanessa, her own suspicions now seeming confirmed, began to distance herself from him, staying with a friend under the guise of needing space to grieve. Final piece of the puzzle fell into place when the police, armed with a search warrant, found small traces of blood in Nathan's car that matched Dominic's DNA. They also discovered the murder weapon, the blood-stained wrench, that Nathan had hidden in the attic, unable to bring himself to dispose of it completely. On a rainy September morning, nearly a month after Dominic's death, Detective Mendoza arrived at the Langford residence with a team of officers. They found Nathan sitting in the living room, half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. As the detective read him his rights, Nathan offered no resistance. In that moment, he felt an odd sense of relief. The game was over. The lies, the fear, the constant vigilance could all stop now. Nathan Langford's trial was brief but sensational. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, his confession a rambling account of jealousy, fantasy, and fatal obsession. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Vanessa, shattered by the revelation of her husband's actions, filed for divorce shortly after his arrest. She sold their house, unable to live with the memories it held, and moved out of state to start a new life.